Yudi Basuki. I am very happy today, particularly to meet Dr. Ashok Das. Welcome, Dr. Ashok Das.
Thank you, Asnawi.
This international lecture series. I'm very happy because I oft read your article, yeah.
Oh,
your
thank you.
research interest is closely related to my research interest.
Nice.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank two of our lecturer today. First is our invited lecturer, Associate Professor Dr. Ashok Das. And the second is our host lecturer, yeah, our beloved professor, Professor Nany Yuliastuti. Good morning, Prof. Nany.
Morning, Pak Asnawi.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, particularly my colleague in the Department of Diponegoro University, our student. Today, we will discuss about a very interesting topic about community participation and empowerment on shelter and services intervention. So we are happy today, Professor Dr. Ashok Das will present about his research and his experience, not only in Indonesia, yeah, Pak Ashok Das, but also in another country. And Bu Nany will share also for us about the community participation and empowerment in housing development. Before I start, I would like to share about the bibliography of our lecture today. First, Associate Professor Dr. Ashok Das. He is Associate Professor at Department of Urban and Regional Planning, University of Hawaii. Yeah. He graduated with bachelor degree in architecture from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, master degree in environmental planning and management and architecture from Kansas State University, and doctoral degree in urban planning from University of California. His research interests revolve broadly around issues of urban poverty in developing countries, primarily in South and Southeast Asia. Yeah, we will learn more today. And community participation and empowerment, slum upgrading and low-income housing, and decentralization and local governance, and the role of civil society in development. This very, very interesting research issues. Yeah. And our host lecturer, Professor Dr. Insinyur Nany Yuliastuti, MSP, is professor at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Diponegoro University. She graduated bachelor degree in architecture at Diponegoro University, master degree at the Institute Teknologi Bandung, and whole doctoral degree from Architecture and Urban Planning Doctor Program, Diponegoro University. Her research focused on sustainable urban development, urban and spatial planning, urban regeneration, and climate change adaptation. So we are today get lecture from two of our very, very interesting speaker today. Yeah. Okay. Before, yeah, I think we will start today our discussion. First, I would like to invite Ashok Das. Yeah, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Asnawi, for your very generous introduction. Can I can share my screen, right? Okay, I will. 1 second. Just give me. Okay. One second, I need to share it again. Just bear with me a moment. Okay. All right. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you very much. So when we had discussed the possible topic, at that time I was thinking I was going to talk more on like delivering shelter and services through community participation and empowerment, focused maybe on Indonesia or India. But since I'm still focusing on that, but I think the total focus is not on community participation and empowerment. I thought it would be better for me to, given, the diversity of your students and the interest, I thought maybe I should give a broader, view of some recent efforts to house the poor in Southeast Asia, which are innovative in some sense, and then also kind of talk about their effectiveness. And in doing so, touch upon the aspects of community participation and empowerment. If people have specific questions on community participation and empowerment, I can definitely entertain those later in the Q&A, but I think you will get a sense. So what I'm presenting here is research that I have been doing for, some of you probably know this, I have been working in Surabaya for a long time. I've done research in Surabaya since about 2005, the end, or 2006, beginning of 2006, and more or less continuously, except maybe for maybe a couple of years in between when I didn't visit Surabaya, and since the pandemic I haven't been able to return, but typically I go there every year. And through that I have also seen what's happening in some other cities, particularly on Java. And then I've also had the opportunity to work in some other countries for much shorter periods of time, but nevertheless had good insights into, some of these shelter innovations that are happening in Asia. So I'm going to talk about a lot of these things today, and I'll focus a little more on Indonesia. So I'll dwell a little more on Surabaya when I get there. So let me see. Okay. So this is a big challenge. So this is just to show you this, this cartoon of a quintessential idea of a mad scientist, trying to get to some ideal solution. So this is just an interpretation that, looking for the perfect solution in housing is almost like it can drive you mad, and you could try lots of different things, but maybe it's still elusive. So, so overall, the argument that I'm trying to make, or the objective I'm trying to make, is that I'm trying to show you a little bit on how shelter interventions have evolved, and then how, with the evolution of different kinds of shelter innovations, how maybe the transformation has happened in terms of the pro-poor focus. Pro-poor focus meaning, are these programs and policies, actively trying to help the situation of the poor people, meet their needs and aspirations, or is it something else in terms of just trying to be more effective and efficient, and so on and so forth? So how is the pro-poor emphasis changing? And so this you will see in some of the examples I'm going to tell you. So in terms of innovation, what do I mean by innovation? So innovation means different kind, could mean anything which is different from how things have generally been done in a certain context. It could be in that country or in that city. And so the innovation could be in terms of the institutional approaches, meaning, let's say, who's doing it? Is it the state government? Is the local government or the provincial government or the national government? Is it partnering with private sector actors, with non-government agencies? How is it happening? How much community participation is happening? So that's the institutional approach. And there are innovations in that. And then also in terms of the tools, etc., what kind of instruments are being used in terms of policy tools or some particular kind of a planning intervention, etc. And also by effectiveness, I mean, so much of this research was published in, has been published in an article in the International Journal of Housing Policy, which I have a link. I have mentioned, I've cited it in a slide at the end. So in that research, what I'm looking at is, what I'm implying by effectiveness is basically four things. One, for some housing policy to be effective, it has to be scaled up, meaning it can't be something, it cannot just be some very interesting idea that is implemented only on a very, very small micro scale. It has to be also something that is sustainable over long periods of time, meaning at least, like 10 to 20 years to have some effect. It should be equitable, meaning those people who are the most deprived or who need assistance the most or will benefit the most should benefit from planning interventions like this. The other part is in terms of what is the role of community sort of participation and community empowerment in that, right? So I'm not going to go into all this, but just to explain that the context is set by these three this is my theoretical framework that I used in that research, and also informs much of my other research also in recent times. So in the case of Indonesia, for example, and in many other Asian countries, a lot of things have changed. How we do those things because of decentralization. Now, the onus, the emphasis, responsibility is on local governments to do a lot of service delivery, including housing. Plus, there are still a lot of debates and arguments on how shelter for the poor should be provided. Today, the consensus is that we should try to do this different from, let's say, 20 years ago. And it's definitely something that is not very common in many countries yet, which is that we should not demolish slums. We should not relocate and displace people who live in slums. Instead, as far as possible, we should do in situ upgrading, meaning in place upgrading. In extreme cases, it may not be possible, let's say because of the vulnerabilities posed by their location, exposure to certain climate threats, etc. So in situations like that, you might have to, of course, displace people. But generally, the consensus is that there should be a lot of involvement of the poor people themselves in the plans and programs that we implement. And to the extent possible, in situ upgrading is, both the most effective, meaning it meets most of the needs of the poor people, and it's also efficient and affordable. However, all of this is changing because of this larger shift towards neoliberalism. So neoliberalism is this idea that, which is again a bigger debate in terms of political science, in terms of international development policies, and so on and so forth. The idea being that governments are not very good at doing many of these things, yet they have assumed the role. And so it is kind of like decentralization also, where the role of the state needs to be sort of either decentralized or reduced. So we should try to get more private sector actors as well as civil society actors to join the state in providing housing or delivering other kinds of shelter and services. Now, this is a controversial topic, so I won't go into too much detail, but this is the context in which a lot of these cases that I'm going to discuss have sort of emerged. Okay. The next point is, this I won't go again. So the basic point is that I'm saying that in most countries we can look at shelter policies, but definitely in Indonesia, in terms of how shelter was approached and what policies prevailed pre-decentralization. So in Indonesia, that was pre-1999. Then there was a lot of confusion and upheaval in the early years, maybe the first 7, 8, 10 years after decentralization. Things are more settled now, but yet, there are many challenges which have not been met adequately. But still, the early confusion that prevailed post decentralization is not the case anymore. However, today we see this, shift towards more neoliberal policies. Again, not necessarily in every sector or very clearly, but there is definitely, I mean, evidence of neoliberalism creeping into policies. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these 4 projects today. So one is in Thailand. It's called the Ban Mongbong Program. So this is one of the largest and considered to be one of the most successful, at least I have considered and argued that it is one of the better programs which involves communities and is about upgrading. A lot of it is in situ upgrading, on-site upgrading. Started off in Bangkok, but it now has spread to other parts of Thailand and is kind of a nationwide program. But still, most of the projects have been done, say, in the Bangkok metropolitan area. Then the second program, then another program I'm going to discuss is called the Completed Housing Resettlement Program, which is in Manila in Philippines. And so Philippines has also tried many different kinds of approaches over the last few decades. But today, this is the program which involves large-scale resettlement of squatters from Metro Manila and other big cities to outside the sort of metropolitan region where the land is cheap and a lot of private sector involvement is happening. So this has become the dominant mode of shelter provision for the poor in the Philippines. Then there are 2 other examples. So one is this is close to, I mean, in Central Java, in Solo, which is the slum upgrading facility. This was a short-lived program. Maybe the traces of that program are still existing, but pretty much it's defunct now. It doesn't really happen the way it was. So that project lasted maybe about 10 years in the middle. This is that phase of, say, pre-decentralized, just early post-decentralization to maybe a few years ago. And then the other program is which you all know, but which is the Rusunawa Program. This is building walk-up flats, public housing flats in much of Indonesia. And this is the one which is dominant in Surabaya, Indonesia now, because it was the preferred choice of the last mayor, the very famous sort of political figure, Bu Risma or Tri Risma Harini. So anyway, so this on the right hand side is just like the various kinds of, this is a very mixed methods kind of an approach, multi-methods, I would say, not mixed methods, multiple qualitative methods approach to understanding, I mean, these things. And so I have discussed the methodology a little more in the paper. Okay, so let's just get straight to the case of Ban Mongbong, right? So in the case of Ban Mongbong, one of the key features is this idea called land sharing, meaning so there are a couple of things. As you can see, I mean, you can read the statistics. So there are about, almost 7 million people, and approximately 6% of those, live in slums. This is the Bangkok context, right? And of course, the metropolitan area is bigger than that. And many of the slums actually are on state lands, meaning government lands, and some are also on private lands. But unlike, say, Jakarta or unlike Manila, there are not very huge, this is just because of the geography and the sort of the location and the spatial, peculiarities of Bangkok, because it has a lot of these canals, etc., that intersect and, sort of divide up the land. So anyway, so you don't see very humongous slums like you see in, say, Jakarta, Manila, Mumbai, or even like in Brazil or in, say, Kenya, those kinds. But there are lots of medium-sized as well as small-sized slum pockets, and they are dispersed all across the city. So the idea is to land share. So what Ban Mongbong has done is that it is able to negotiate with the landowner, whether that be the government or, let's say, the private sector owner, to kind of allow the squatters, meaning people who have occupied the land, to continue to live there, but with some rearrangement, so that people, they can be housed differently, so the people can be sort of within the same site, moved into better designed homes and even flats, depending, and with the involvement of the community with their participation. And that will free up land for the owner, who can then put the land to some other use, like commercial use, for commercial purposes, or let's say for building office complexes, etc. So this kind of is a win-win solution where both the official owner of the land and the squatters are able to make productive use of the land. Otherwise, what happens is many places that it continues as a deadlock for years and years and decades, and neither are the slums upgraded nor are the original owners able to put the land to any kind of use. Okay, so this is the context. Now, why did it happen in the history is that it is the brainchild of this person called Samsuk Bunyabancha, who is a very leading figure, and she was an activist in the 70s. She worked for NGOs, and then she joined the government, and she's also a trained architect and has enough planning experience. So she was very pro-poor in her attitude, and when she came to the National Housing Authorities, offices, she changed a lot of the ideas and discourses that were prevailing, and she promoted this Ban Mongbong idea. Before Cotty, this is the organization that she formed, which is a government kind of organization, but it behaves more like an NGO because it's quite autonomous. And it's the main driver of the Ban Mongbong Program. Now, it is a very well endowed program, meaning there's a lot of money, and most of the money comes from the national government, and some of it earlier came from maybe international donors, etc. And the implementation is done through a very collaborative, approach. So there are lots of NGOs, lots of university, not lots, but several universities in Bangkok, whose planning and architecture departments and faculty and students are involved, including a lot of young volunteers. And they work with the communities to design and plan the redevelopments in the slum areas. Okay, so in terms of like the effectiveness, right? So it is a very successful model because it has scaled up. It is very sustainable because of the partnerships that have evolved. And it allows for very customized solutions depending on what the peculiarities of location as well as needs of each community are. In terms of equity, it could be argued that it is not the most equitable because, over time, what has happened is it seems that those communities which are more politically connected or those who are more economically capable are able to extract better outcomes from their engagement in Ban Mongbong as compared to communities which are weaker, right? And then there hasn't been much innovation. The model it was an innovative model, but ever since its implementation, there haven't been too many sort of innovations within that. Anyway, so but overall, it's a very good program, I think. So this is an example, for instance, just to show you, this is a particular community called Suan Plu, where Suan Plu was kind of destroyed because of a fire. And there were many slum, households in that. So after the fire, the government gave them two options. Either you can move to a different place where the government will give them housing, and that's a different program, or they can stay on site and use Ban Mongbong and redevelop the program. So a lot of NGOs, university, groups were involved in this. At least 2 or 3 NGOs were involved at different times. And the design solution that came about was very interesting. So they built like row houses, which you see and many of these houses had on the ground floor areas where people could have businesses and small shops. Because as you know, in slums, a lot of people, the slums are not just housing options, but they also provide livelihood options. And most people are in slums work in the informal sector, and they're self-employed, and they have their own small businesses which they run. And in Indonesia, this, it's very common. You can make like, handicrafts, kerajinan, you can make like krupuk, and you can make different kinds of things. But you need, and it's both the use of public space within slums as well as like in kampung, but also within the homes, which are shared spaces, despite the fact that you have very limited sort of floor area. And that is usually not something which is provided when people are moved into like regular, say, public housing kind of flats. So in Ban Mongbong, this option was there. And what you see in the beginning is there's a small temple. This is also designed by them. There's a community center to the right-hand side. And then this is, like if you go through so on the ground floor, these are, design spaces which are like shops or workshops, and people actually sit there, drink coffee, eat meals. And not every house has this, but there are a couple of lanes where people who had businesses, they have been located over there. But then there were also a lot of renters who lived in these slums, with the same owners of the original sort of structures in the Suan Plu community. So in most resettlement cases or redevelopment cases, renters never get, a flat, for instance. They are always excluded from the redevelopment options. So in this case, the original owners who were the people who got these bigger plots, they said that, okay, we will take less land, but we will give some land so that you can build like a multi-storied structure like flats for the people who have been our renters and tenants for a long time, right? So this was a very interesting gesture which came about because of community participation. It was very empowering for the renters and tenants, and it happened, and it's a very unique thing that happened in this particular community. And had the community participation not been there, this would definitely not have happened, and it's a very rare thing to see, Okay, so let me go to slum upgrading facility. I'm looking at my time also, and Asnawi or somebody can tell me if, like when I'm about 10 minutes close to like 40 minutes or so. Anyway, so in the slum upgrading facility program, this was very different. This is in Solo, and this is the time when Jokowi was still, the mayor of Solo, and he was a very progressive mayor of Solo. As you know, he relocated those riverbank squatters, and he made a marketplace for them. You know the story. It's a much smaller context. It's not like Bangkok. It's a very small city, right? And in this case, the idea was initiated by UN Habitat. So somebody high up in UN Habitat had this, brilliant idea and they thought that the only thing that is withholding sort of upgrading and, like improving housing supply for people in Indonesia, for poor people in Indonesia, is the fact that there is not enough housing financing, right? So this was a program which was entirely focused on financing housing. And they believe that if you can unlock financing, a lot of things will fall in place. And they had this grand vision that then this is going to expand all over Indonesia. And so this was the slum upgrading facility was a pilot project that was tested in Solo, but also in 3 other countries. Eventually, it was only implemented in, I think, 2 countries. I think it was either Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, which was the other one, I forget, where there was a small intervention. And there was also supposed to be one program, I think, in Africa somewhere. Anyway, so the point is, in Solo, it was the one which was really tried out. And the idea was that once you start putting financing into this, and you also try to stimulate say savings and financing by communities themselves, which is something that happens in Ban Mongbong also, by the way, that one of the approaches is that the communities members are made to save very regularly and build up a corpus for the community, which they can use towards then upgrading their own community. But the key thing is that there is household, community level individual savings, which is very critical, right? Or household savings. So this was also the concept to some extent in Solo, but there was also a lot of external funding which was going to come in. In the design process, there was very little consultation with the communities, almost nothing. And even the designers and planners who came were actually UN Habitat brought these people from different parts of the world. Most of them had no familiarity with Indonesia. And, the project went on for a few years, but the total time, including, over multiple visits that the consultants spent in Indonesia was maybe just about 7 weeks. Yeah. So, there was a lot of, in hindsight, we can criticize a lot of those things. So the idea was, so in terms of what happened in SAF was that it was a sustainable, but it was a much smaller project. All they did was maybe about, let's say, a few hundred households were upgraded in maybe 2 or 3 communities in 2 or 3 neighborhoods, right, over a period of about 7-8 years. So the program was sustainable. It probably, like I said, it probably still continues, but it doesn't really produce much, and it's very small and it's very incremental. It supposedly inspired a facility for funding these kinds of upgrading projects in Indonesia. It was, I think, called the Cliff facility or something. And there was equitable impact because they did actually try to address some of the worst of communities in Solo, including informal settlements. And it really failed in scaling up because it could only generate like 1 billion Indonesian rupiah, which is nothing. And then there was very little support from the local government, actually direct support, because they did not involve the local government very much, interestingly. And there were absolutely no NGOs or civil society organizations which played a role in this. Yeah. So these are some pictures from there. So this is one of these small communities along the river where, so it was a very standard kind of thing. It was basically like a duple unit. So each unit had 2 levels. A lower level and an upper level, but again, it didn't provide for any space for pursuing livelihoods or other things, but they did provide water supply and sanitation. So, but again, the other problem was they did not really provide individual toilets in these houses, which is something which can be provided actually when you're doing a project like this nowadays. So they made, but anyways, they did make some community toilets, etc. So it wasn't really very great. The next context is Metro Manila's context, right? So in Metro Manila, wait a second, I'm just checking if there is. Okay, sorry, just yeah. So this is a program where in Metro Manila, so again, there's a lot of history about, so in slums have been a big issue in the Philippines, right? Particularly in Manila. And it was because until about the 1980s, under President Marcos, actually, there was slums were criminalized by a particular law. Then that was removed. And then in the late 80s and early 90s, there were very innovative programs that, I mean, emerged in the Philippines, particularly one called the Community Mortgage Program, which was very, very successful and became an international best practice. But over time, this is the new liberal influence. But still, the problem is too big. I mean, there are just too many slums. There is a lot of activism. There is a lot of resistance to displacement and resettlement. So all of these things put together, and there's not much land in sort of the urban developed area of Metro Manila. So a combination of all these factors has led the government to promote some programs. Like I said, the CHR, these resettlement programs are the big programs. They're also trying to build some infrastructure projects, which requires big infrastructure, I mean, transportation projects, etc., which require people to be moved. So all of these things put together. So what they're doing is they are convincing people to move out, entire settlements to move to the outskirts of Metro Manila. And so these are rural sort of regions around Metro Manila, where the land is cheap. A lot of the land is owned by some very big developers, and some of the land is also owned by local governments in rural local governments. So they are being incentivized by the national government to do this, and they're sending people out there. What they do is they give them tenure, meaning they get the rights to the house, and they provide them electricity and water supply. But as you will see in the pictures, the quality of life is really bad. And the thing is, there's no thought given to livelihoods and employment. So interestingly, what happens is, most people, most men at least, have continued to work in Metro Manila because the jobs are there, but they are now about 30 kilometers or 50 kilometers away from the city, right? So they have to travel every day, or what they do is they actually many of the men continue to rent small places in Manila or in Metro Manila somewhere, and then they come back during the weekends or so, or every 2 weeks or so. The women, so when I went and visited some of these developments, I was surprised to see that mostly it was women and children who lived in these communities, right? And there was absolutely nothing. There were very few, because even the NGOs are concentrated more in Metro Manila. So there were very few NGOs even providing social services and other benefits in the area. So this is what they look like. Okay, this is a huge settlement. The entire, hillside has been developed like this. So in many places, as far as you can see in the horizon, you have these thousands and thousands of units which have been built like this. And if you look at it closely, you see the very poor quality of, it's just a basic structure that's been built without any thought, and it's very tiny, Of course, some are better because there are different developers who are developing different, communities. And of course, with time, some things have changed, but still, it's very, very basic. They have some schools, etc., like this, which are again supported by the national government, public schools. Everything is metered now. Everything has to be paid for. There's cost recovery. This is a neoliberal idea that poor shouldn't also get anything free. They should pay back. So as you can see, so that people cannot tamper with the electricity meters, they've raised them so high, on the electricity post itself, right? So this is a common thing. Similarly, water is metered for every household. So again, so this kind of puts a burden. Now they're having to pay for a lot of these things, and which is not a bad thing per se, but the thing is their employment and income levels have gone down because of what I just said, of how the family has been sort of fragmented, and people are displaced, but they still have to pay these bills very regularly. And these are some pictures. And there's only one NGO I found. This was a Korean faith-based NGO when I had visited some years ago, which was the only, in that entire province, is the only NGO which was providing some sort of, skills development and jobs, training for local, women over there. But there were no other NGOs at that time. Okay, now let me just get very quickly to the Rusunawa concept, right? So as you know, you're pretty familiar with Rusunawa, but what happened, so a little bit of a Surabaya. So Surabaya is known internationally as being very successful with upgrading its kampung. So almost all the kampung in Surabaya have been upgraded, and this upgrading started way back in 1969. It was the brainchild of Professor Johan Silas, who also kind of, who was the founder of the architecture department at ITS, Institute of ITS, Institute of Technology, Surabaya. And he also founded the architecture department at Petra Christian University, and there was one more university back then. So 3 architecture departments were founded by Johan Silas, And these were the only ones outside of Itebe or Bandung at that time, right? So with his students and with, this was still like President Suharto's authoritarian era. So he was, asked by the mayor to, provide a solution for housing at that time. And unlike all other cities in Indonesia, he said that we should not displace people from, and there were a lot of these informal settlements and, not very, very poor kampung. He said, let's not move people into like flats and, and multi-level housing, but let us improve the quality of infrastructure and provide basic infrastructure in these kampung, and that will. So this was the origins of the idea of slum upgrading, and this idea became, and Surabaya's results were so successful that the World Bank and many other international donor agencies took the idea and expanded it globally, right? Of course, there were similar experiments in other places, but Surabaya was definitely one of the pioneers outside of, let's say, Latin America at that time, right? So, sure. Okay. And so in Rusunawa, what has happened is that it has become, sorry, so let me just show you the KIP picture. So these are the early pictures of the KIP interventions. There's a lot of community involvement and incremental development and self-help, all these concepts were there. So what it has led to, that in Kampung in Surabaya, you see that there are lots of places inside the city where you have dense kampung which have like improved over time. So this is a particular kampung called Nginden, for example, which is in this southeastern part of the city. And what you see below this, if you can see my cursor, where I've said two, these are actually regular plotted development. This is, developer built housing, and this is traditional kampung, and this is the traditional kampung. And what you see is things like this, right? So this is inside that kampung I showed you. It's very dense. It's got multiple uses, and people have been able to expand. And it also provides housing for the poorest people, because a lot of people live in the dormitories, or the boarding houses, the kos-kosan, right, inside the thing. And it's very interesting that Surabaya's built form looks like this, where even around downtown, you see a lot of low-rise dense housing. And this is the great thing about it. As you can see, the highest density are around in the central part of the city. And that's because a lot of affordable housing, because of kampung, exists there. So anyway, so this was a successful thing. And this is the kind of quality of life that you see inside kampung. There's a lot of sense of community. People can, this is a picture very late around midnight. But also there were some other communities like the informal riverbank communities, which were not upgraded by the city because they were considered illegal, because they were not officially in designated kampung areas. So over time, many of these have been demolished, or they haven't been, provided. And some of them have been actually upgraded by by collaborations with community, other kinds of new NGOs and civil society organizations. But since in Surabaya, since about the early 2000s, the emphasis has been to build more Rusunawa, and particularly when Bu Risma became the mayor, she started pushing Rusunawa as a main agenda and not upgrading. Partly this was because of the neoliberal incentive, because it was very difficult to generate one's own finances in the city to support upgrading or do other kinds of housing. So Rusunawa was popular because the money was being given by the national government, and only the land had to be provided by the local government. And although there had been some Rusunawa which had been built in Surabaya in the past, and those were also built by Johan Silas's team at ITS, and the designs were very good, the recent ones have become very routine. And this is the kind of stuff you see all over Indonesia now. So a lot of the housing now around Surabaya is becoming like this, right? So as you can see, they're very tight quarters, and people have to live inside them there. And in the newer Rusunawa, they don't even allow you to, spill over into the corridors or into the common areas. So it becomes and many of the new Rusunawa are being built in areas which are inaccessible, not well served by transportation, so on and so forth. And as you can see, this is like inside one of these new Rusunawa, where they don't let them have the shops outside. So people have to, either somehow, use a little space and sell what they're selling, or, have a shop kind of thing inside the house. These are just new regulations that control it. I won't go into the foundings, etc. But I wanted to point out something else. But in 1990, one of the earliest Rusunawa in Surabaya was designed by Professor Silas and his students in a very patient manner with a lot of community engagement. This involved a community which had very peculiar habits. And when they said that even though they'll move into the slums, so into the flats, they would like to be able to continue some activities like community cooking and like community sort of washing and things like this. So it's very interesting that this is a Rusunawa where inside you see, this is on the second floor, third floor, you see community kitchens and community sort of spaces. They are so, spacious that you can actually have weddings. This is again on the upper floors. There's so much space. Okay, just one more minute. I'll just conclude here. So the thing that I wanted to conclude by showing you these different pictures is that, decentralization has generated various kinds of institutional arrangements, but in general, the local role is kind of weakening in many countries, and they are trying to do these solutions which are not necessarily the best in terms of housing. If when there's a lot of push to do scaling up, meaning produce housing at a very mass scale, it sort of hampers the quality as well as the participation and empowerment of the people, the stakeholders who are there. So in terms of research, etc., for future research, I think we should be able to look at these innovations and these ideas, new interventions much more closely, and do much more detailed qualitative research to understand how it affects people's lives and livelihoods. There's a lot of emphasis on successful cases and best practices. We don't study failures very much, right? And these are things. And finally, one last thing I wanted to mention was, is that we have to, given the challenge, the state or the government cannot do this on its own, and it must work more with both market actors like in the Philippines, but in a different way, and also a lot with the civil society organizations. And having civil society organizations in the housing sector has a lot of benefits, which I won't mention, but there's a lot of innovation and diffusion of ideas that can happen with the involvement of civil society organizations. So thank you so much. Sorry, I went a little over, but thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashok Das. Very interesting presentation, particularly the recommendation and the conclusion. This is very important for us, but we have limited time. We will discuss later. And the second lecture is Prof. Nany. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Pak Asnawi. I will share my presentation first. Okay, this is some problem with my presentation. Maybe Intan, can you help me to share my presentation today?
Of course, yes.
Okay.
Share. Yes.
Okay, first of all, I would like to say good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm very pleased to see you all, especially for Mr. Assoc. We can say with Pak Assoc, is right?
Yes.
And of course, Professor Wiwandari as a head of department, our department, and Pak, I look Pak, the head of the program, Pak Yudi, and Bu Wido, and of course of all my colleagues in department, lecturer, and my student. Thank you for coming here to hear my presentation today. For the first, I will give you the title of my presentation today is about community participation and empowerment in housing development. Of course, for this, I give the case of slum upgrading. Yeah. Okay. Next. As an introduction, I start from the Habitat meeting in Vancouver in 1976. Developing country city are competing to deal with housing and settlement problem in the urban area, such a problem of slums and squatter. The slum and wild condition occurs because there is no formal sector support people who can afford it and uptaking informal ways to get house. So the key, one of the key word in my presentation is slum upgrading, and we can look from the side of community development. Okay, next. This is the data from the UN Habitat 2010 that show the number of people living in slum area in Asia Pacific urban region increased from 500,000 in around 500,000 in 27 to 514,000 people, and corresponding to 10.9% in 3 years. And the next, the slum settlement are always associated with the urban poverty. However, efforts that have been made so far through slum upgrading are not directly related to the poverty elevation. This is from Khalifa 2015. And the squatter settlement upgrading includes not only physical upgrading, but also social and economic improvement as integrated approach by empowering the slum dweller to be able to work and improve their earning capacity. So from the word empower here, I would like to give you the definition of the empowering. Next. Furthermore, I give you the related to the global issue that until now is still on the way, because SDG target is, we look at the target by 2030, the slum upgrading, it's still on the target. So Indonesia government until now still develop the slum upgrading, and we hope that, because now is 2021, so 9 years later, we can stop the slum, like the program from the government with the name if 100 or 100. Yeah. Next. This is the word empowerment. I look from the chamber, the new paradigm of development, which is people-centered, participatory, empowering, and sustainability. So, community empowerment efforts are increasingly becoming the necessity in every development effort. Especially, we can look at the case of slum upgrading. Next, again, empowerment. We can look for this definition. Empowerment is a process with increasingly more members of a given area or environment make and implement social responsibility decision where the probable consequence of which is an increase in the life change of some people without decrease in the life change of other. So this is the process, yeah. And the next, this is some definition that come from many people, but the essential is how is the community empowerment, yeah, as an ability to individual who combine with the community in building the empowerment of the community concern. So again, next, yeah, and the from the Dharma one, yeah, again the process having enough energy enabling people with the capability to greater bargaining power. This is the bargaining power is the important thing, yeah, to make their own decision and more easily access to a sort of better living. And empowerment also refers to the ability to people, especially vulnerable and weak group, to participating in the development process in decision that affect them. Empowerment refers to efforts to relocate power through changing social structure. So from the word empowerment, it is the process how to look in case of slum upgrading area. Next, taking about experience in several projects in Indonesia, yeah. Some of the project with the how to implement the slum upgrading, and I will look only maybe 4, yeah, because many projects that have been done previously and now. The first is about, we call it with NUSSP, Neighborhood Upgrading Shelter Project. The NUSSP is upgrade the initiatives of enhanced accommodation on the atmosphere in slum neighborhood for low-income group. So, NUSSP to tackle the problem of slum and to speed up the achievement of SDGs target. And the second is the project with the name of, we call it in Indonesia P2BPK, or Community-Based Housing Development. P2BPK is an alternative solution of the settlement problem, which based on the new paradigm through community-based development. And the next is about the name of KIP, yeah, Kampung Improvement Program. The project focused on improving the physical condition of slum area. And until nowadays, there are projects with the name of City Without Slum, or usually called Kotaku. The objective of Kotaku program is to increase access to infrastructure and basic services in urban slum to prevent the emergence of new slum. Based on the project that have done in Indonesia, I will look at some place that we can look about the community development in slum upgrading. Okay, the next, I will share about the Kemijen village in Semarang. This is my research location at that time. That Kemijen is a slum area, of course, yeah, we can look. Kemijen is one of the urban villages in the city of Semarang, which was appointed as a pilot project for metropolitan environmental management. Administratively, this village belongs to the East Semarang district. The total Kemijen is 120 hectares, which is inhabited by 13,000 people, or 30, almost 4,000 households. Yeah, this is the condition of population of Kemijen. And the next, Kemijen is the population and Kemijen is about 42% is the people with the 26 and 50 years, and Kemijen people who live in uninhabitable housing condition. Economic, this condition can be explained based on the livelihood of 80% of the people of Kemijen are industrial worker. This is because the location of Kemijen is not far from the industrial area with the name of Terboyo and Genu. And of course, most of the people income is also not far at the region minimum wage level or below. This is the condition of the Kemijen population. And after several times at that time, I gave the meeting with the people, with the community, and this is the stage that I give the discussion with the community. Next, and the carrying out community meeting in the states. For the first is we make mapping issues in residential area, of course in Kemijen area. Sorry, in this presentation I have not give the map there. Maybe you can see in the next, yeah. And after mapping issues, this the state after that is searching for troubleshooting and determine problem solving and establish decision agreement. And the next one is make slum area handling priority. Of course, it depends on the budget, yeah. And it is take almost 1 year to make the meeting with the community over there. And usually the meeting at that night, and there is a lot of discussion at that time. And after the meeting is finished, so I'm very surprised because the community of the Kemijen village, they can make the priority, the program for her village. The next is the table that we can look, yeah, to describe the proposed by the community of the Kamijen, yeah, and the following step, the community with the group, of course, because it's depend on the airway, yeah, and we look after holding the meeting, then the several strategy were decided. For example, I choose one of the program that he proposed is development of proper housing infrastructure. Yeah. So what is the activity? One of the activity is about integrated waste disposal site, because at that time the Kamijen village have not the waste disposal with the clear location. So after that, the community make the plan for the implementation. Yeah, this is about 2023. So maybe the next year the program will be done. Yeah, and then they can find the source of the fund. Yeah, for city government, and the next is from the GSR, yeah, and the stakeholder with this program by the Semarang City Environmental Services, and then PT Indonesia Power, because this is the GSR that gives the fund for the development in Kamijen village at that time. And for the list, there are many programs that proposed by the community at that time. Next, we can see the proposed program with the capacity building training. The ID come from the community, so we can look the community group training and the youth training and capacity building, facilitating collaboration between neighborhood community, or we can know with the name of RW, yeah, in management. Community skill training about aquaculture, training to make souvenirs, because some of the household over there have to make souvenir, yeah, many household over there, and then production group managerial training. This is again one of the program that proposed by the community. And the next, I think it's you can see that many proposed that come from the community. The next is number 6, yeah. The program name is physical arrangement of the tourism environment, because at that time the Kamijen village have the pond, a big pond, and they proposed to plan as a tourism. So for this, there are many activities that can propose, yeah, and the source of fund and the stakeholder. Okay, this is one of the activity in the community of Kemijen village. Next, this is that I mentioned before, the project about the name on NUSSP, yeah. For that I mentioned before that the NUSSP to improve urban neighborhood access to appropriate housing by low income household in urban area. And that project, the community driven development, focus on participation by the local community in planning, design, development initiative, as well as community control of resource, community involvement in implementation, and use of the community-based monitoring and evaluation technique. So one of the community participation in NUSSP project in Bandar Lampung, I look the priority factor, yeah, that come from the community participation, yeah, is one is a good cooperation among the key stakeholders, local government, village head, chairman, neighborhood association, community, or self-reliant organization, or we can call by the name of LKM. Yeah, the community inclusion in the LKM and the community cooperation behavior in the neighborhood. Clarity of the program socialization by the local government and the local income community station life. Proper acknowledgement to the community and the community freedom to speak in the public meeting. This is one of the factor that I get from the Bandar Lampung city about the community, because at that time, before the community cannot speak in the public meeting. And after the NUSSP and after the process of the community participation, now the people, the community can speak in the public meeting. Next. This is lesson learned, but I think about Ban Mongbong, Pak Asok have mentioned before with the clearly, yeah. So I'm not mentioned with the detail, because one is I agree with you, because Ban Mongbong is one of the best experience in slum upgrading in Thailand, yeah. And you see the actors, one of the important thing, one of the important process is about the delivering, providing housing in that slum area in Bangkok. Yeah. So NGO Cotty is, I agree, it's a wide partnership. Yeah. And strong community with the innovation. Yeah. So Thailand is one of the country with nationwide slum upgrading program with community at its heart. Yeah, it's a center. Next. This is the principle. I think it's I skip because Pak Asok mentioned before. Now, this is the NGO that I'm very interested. Yeah, because Cotty is NGO independent and they have the ability to facilitate the slum upgrading in Bangkok with facilitated the community. So we can use the community-based program management where the community is the implementer of the activity, the plan and initiative. And the next is about the Cotty diagram. Yeah, I see that from this picture, where is the Cotty, the position of the Cotty, and in the progress of living conditions slum dweller is rooted in putting community in the center with the orange one, and the community facilitate the community network, and from the community network and from the stakeholder that support the community development come from local authority, academic, NGO, and others. So we look the Cotty in this progress of slum upgrading in Thailand. It's very interesting. Next. Now I would like to see the communication, community participation, people process. The question is, how do we bring people into the center of the process? Yeah, by bringing people to the center of decision making, they can action, they can responsibility. This is the main aspect for the people process. And through the process, in the step of the process, we can look at the CDC, yeah, Community Development Organization, and Community Action Planning, and Community Contract. For this aspect, I think Mr. Asnawi, it's very familiar with this, yeah. So usually we, as a team in the subject lecture in our department, yeah. Now, this is 3 of the process in the step of doing participation for making slum upgrading at that in the Thailand, yeah. Next. This is the very interesting because I would like to give you some again community process, yeah. The step that the community make for the first one is the socialization of the project, of course. And the step 2 is communication, mobilization, and organization. From this, the community will make the group, yeah, to make a not big group, but there are some people, they have group. And the next after that is a community mapping and land adjustment. Usually with the facilitator by the student at that time, they can help the people to make the community mapping, the map, yeah. And the next is community action planning that I mentioned before, after the step 3. And the step 5 is community contracting with the people, with the group of people. And the next step is community implementation. This is the step that happened in the Thailand with the slum upgrading, Ban Mongbong with the Cotty NGO. Next. Maybe this is the picture that we can see very clearly, because the partnership for urban slum upgrading, the first photo here is about the flood in the slum area. This is the main problem, main issue in the slum housing area. And after that, they make the organizing community, yeah. And then the workshop and training of community that I mentioned before is depend on the techniques and the budget and so on.
5 minutes more, yeah.
Oh, yes, thanks. And then the next step is technical assistance by staff and technical specialists. That's why that I mentioned, usually the student at that time from the architecture department help the community, yeah, to make the planning. And after that, the final proposal contract approved by the municipality, and then the signing agreement by district community. And after that, community members start construction, the slum upgrading. And for after that, foundation work, road construction, and the final is footbridge, yeah, improve access at that area. This is the step that communication action plan. Okay, next. From this slide, it can be seen how governance role, yeah, in being empower and enable in providing slum upgrading, yeah, and strengthening the community participation in slum area. So if we look at that, the governance at the center, and they have the authority to make to protect, like how to make the upgrading area, the policy or the resettlement, and in the below the empowerment, yeah, of course empowerment of individual and community, because the vulnerable people. This is that I explained before, the empowerment of community. So two sides, protection, give the policy for upgrading and empowerment the people or the community. This is the position of government. Next. Yeah. This is my conclusion. Yeah. One is improving the quality of society by strengthening individual and community. And the second, encouraging community-based settlement development in, of course, in slum upgrading area. And then keep strengthening community and local government capacity. And the next is the existence of government enable and empowerment by paying extension, regulation, and facilitation. And the last, as an overall conclusion, yeah, in Indonesia, looking to the effort of dealing with slum upgrading, the experience can be seen in generation which approach, they try to empower the community so that community with their own capacity would be able to improve the community social cohesiveness. And the general objective of the City Without Slums program is to increase access infrastructure basic in the slum and prevent the emergence of new slum in order to support the realization of livable, productive, and sustainable. Okay, that's all my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I give the time to Mr. Asnawi.
Thank you very much, Prof. Nany Yuliastuti. Very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
In the conclusion between Professor Nany and Prof. Ashok, that is concurrence, yeah. At the end of Ashok Das presentation, Ashok Das mentioned we should understand about the market failure, state failure, and NGO failure, yeah. And Bu Nany say about the governance. Yeah, governance is very important. I think this is the same perspective, yeah, between Ashok Das and Nany University to see the issue of the empowerment or community development in shelter or in housing development. Okay, of course, if you speak about shelter and community development and housing is very multifaceted problems. And I hope all of the audience, yeah, particularly our student and my colleague in Department of Diponegoro University could take this time to question and answer. To elaborate the ideas, yeah, from our lecture today. For the question, I give here. Thank you. Yeah, raise the hand. Yeah, this is Aulia Rahma Hasibuan first. Is there any other question? Okay. Before other question. Please, Aulia Rahma Hasibuan, and then Burlandung, ya. Okay.
Thank you. First of all, my name is Aulia Rahma Hasibuan. I'm a student of Urban and Regional Planning at Diponegoro University. Our honor, Professor Assoc, our honor, Professor Nany, our honor, all of my lecturers. So as we talk about the land sharing, we can see that we already have some solution for the settlement problems, for the slum areas and poverty problems, such as Rusunawa and etc. So, but I think that the condition of the economy has become an issue at the moment. Money has become a thing that keeps you alive and keeps you happy. Everyone will try to get money as much as they can. Even those wealthy people try to get more money. And one of the most profitable way to keep increasing money is by investing it on the property. For example, as the pandemic happened, most of the students of Diponegoro University went back to their homeland, back to their hometown. But the boarding houses keeps increasing. So the building keeps increasing and the open land continuously decreasing. So the question is, how about that, and what can we do about these people's egoism, and what can we do as a community to solve it? Thank you.
Wow, Aulia Rahma Hasibuan. Okay, the second answer question, Bu Landung, Era City.
Thank you very much. My question to Pak Assoc, yeah. I think it's very important to point out the participation as key success to sustainability. And it also includes how to maintain the equity in the empowerment process. But generally in Indonesia, the context of participation is also influenced by power relation between husband and wife or other family member in the household. For example, when the decision maker in the family is dominated by husband, then the woman normally hinder themselves to be participated. Is that also happen in your cases, Pak Assoc? Maybe you can tell from your experience how to handle this kind of obstacle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bu Landung. We have two questions. First, I would like Pak Ashok Das, yeah, please comment.
Does Bu Nany want to answer Aulia's question first?
Okay. Bu Nany, Prof Nany.
I mean, I'll also answer, but maybe she could answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Aulia Rahman Hasibuan. Yeah. Your question is about the poor people. Yeah. So usually in case of slum upgrading, there are poverty, yeah, urban poverty over there, and the issue is how is the people with the low income people can affordability to pay their house. Yeah, this is some of the issue in case of the funding or affordability to pay by the people in the low income. And until now, you see that some of our country have the scheme for the people with the low income people, and so many schemes that you can see maybe from the department, the Ministry of Public Housing. We can see that many schemes. For example, the name of give the P2 BPK, pembangunan perumahan berbasis PP2BT, pembangunan permukiman berbasis tabungan. And then there are some FLPP. This is the funding from the government, and of course it depend on the earning, yeah, from the people. There are many. For example, previously Rusunawa is built as a Rusunami, so it is a rumah susun milik, yeah. But after the people cannot reach, yeah, affordability to pay, so they don't to the name by Rusunawa, not me itu is a milik tapi Rusunawa. So government hope that the first housing is in the Rusunawa, and the next they will buy the housing with the authority, maybe with buying the landed housing on something like that. So it is many scheme, yeah. Aulia can see that this is the homework of the government to see which is the proper with the community, yeah. Pak Asnawi can have to answer maybe, yeah. This is the answer for the Aulia, yeah. So if you said that land sharing, yeah, this is another scheme. It's about the how to make the land for the poor people, yeah, because one of the project is a good project is about land consolidation, yeah. So this is come from the Ministry of Agraria, Planning, and BPN. Yeah. Nowadays, the land consolidation, vertical and horizontal, is one of the alternative. Yeah. If you ask about land sharing, and then maybe you heard about land banking and so on. This is the name of the model. Is depend on the land, yeah, and as depend on the funding is another factor, yeah. Okay, I hope my answer will answer your question. Thank you.
Very much. Yes. Now we hope some innovation approach from the experience from the research from Ashok Das. Please answer the question.
Thank you. So thank you, Aulia Rahman. That's a very good question. I mean, this is one of the biggest concerns worldwide now. I mean, in the last 20 years or so, or 25 years, the rate at which wealth inequality has grown around the world is alarming, right? So increasingly we hear about these things about how the top 1% or top 0.5% of a country's population or city's population owns more wealth than the bottom 50% put together is really scary. So yes. Now the thing is, very generally speaking, the thing is that, in capitalism, you cannot have everyone being equal. Then it's a different kind of an ideological and economic model if you want that, and that hasn't succeeded either, meaning say extreme socialism or communism did not succeed either. So the challenge here is to then how do you prevent the disproportionate accumulation of wealth into a very few hands, especially now we're talking about, let's say, the housing sector or the real estate sector. How do you do that? And the second part is that you have to try to discourage that. Like, you can't just say that, people shouldn't be doing this or they cannot buy more homes, but then you have to disincentivize it and incentivize something else, especially the redistribution of wealth, for example. So I'll just give you some examples. So one of the common things that's being done, the common thing that's being done in a lot of cities, like in the developed world, but also in developing countries, it's what is called inclusionary housing. So which means that you need the private market in order to scale up the housing supply process, to create more supply, and also more competition among developers is good because that will actually reduce the cost of housing. But again, those things have to be regulated well. Now, how do you discourage, or how do you make sure that not everything is only just helping the rich? So inclusionary housing, what it requires is that a certain percentage, say 10%, 15%, 20% of the units that are being built in any private housing development should be kept aside for people below a certain income level. Now, what is affordable and what is feasible varies from city to city and country to country. So even in Indonesia, you actually have a policy like that called Hunian Barimbang, which has been around for a long time, but almost no local government has ever used it. Okay, so in the beginning, Hunian Barimbang was like 1:3:6, which meant that if a private developer is making one luxury unit, then he has to make 3 middle-income homes and 6 low-income, for low-income families. Then there was a lot of criticism from developers, so they brought it down to 1:2:3. That is what stands today. But to my knowledge, no city has really done this very well or satisfactorily. I think it was only experimented with a little bit in Makassar. Now, the other thing is, it only talks about landed housing, meaning individual homes. It does not apply to apartments and flats and condominiums. In the developed world, it mostly applies to flats and condominiums. But in Indonesia, you can't apply that to like Rusunawa or private flats kind of development. So anyway, so that's one thing we can think about. But is that the answer? Probably not, because you'll still only be able to help very few people. So the other bigger question is to how do you prevent land being consumed for the development of just very high-end housing and high-end sort of uses. That has to be, so that requires the empowerment of communities and working together with NGOs. The media has a role to play in order to prevent collusion between state actors as well as the developers to sort of take away land that actually belongs to the public, for example. So how do you prevent a second Jakarta from happening, let's say, right? Jakarta was full of kampung, and today you don't see anything. And you have like malls that span like 7 city blocks and 8 city blocks, and there are like 100 or close to 200 malls. How did this happen in Jakarta, right? Why? Those kinds of questions have to be asked. So that is where I think I have a lot of faith in the empowerment of society and civil society working together to prevent this. But again, there are no easy answers. So that's my first. So one is redistribution, second is sort of production, right? And making sure that you also can make housing for the poor people. That's one question. So I think we can talk more about that, but that's the bigger concept. So I wouldn't say that we should put, restriction on, like, say, how much people can consume or buy. That is then detrimental to the whole, economic system. But some cities in the world, like say, for example, Vancouver in Canada, and some American cities also considering now, given how high the cost of housing has become and how unaffordable it has become for most common people, even in the US and Canada. So what they're doing is they are putting much higher taxes on second homes and third homes and fourth homes, which are being bought by the rich and powerful, and for basically investment purposes. Similarly, they are putting much higher taxes on homes. But again, that is debatable. They're putting higher taxes on properties being bought by foreign people, right? So there's a lot of investment that is coming from Asia, for example, particularly China, but also other countries, and they are buying properties in the rich world, and that is driving up housing costs, right? So that's another thing that some cities are looking at. So this is what I mean. So you have to figure out a way to make sure that the wealth is redistributed among society's weaker sections. Otherwise, you'll create a very lopsided and sort of a dystopian future. So that's my question for all years. Answer. To answer Bulandung's question, yes, Bulandung, it's very, there are many issues. What you pointed out is absolutely true. The participation as well as the empowerment experienced by an individual depends on many other things. That was the kind of slide I was trying to get to at the end, but I ran out of time because that's a different conversation again. But the thing is, yes, it depends on a lot of things. Empowerment of an individual can depend at what the macro structure is, regulatory structure. So for example, if you live in North Korea, for instance, there is very little chance that you can participate in anything or say anything, right? You're much better off being in Indonesia, which is a democratic country, and you have a lot of freedom, right? So that's a macro structure. Within the country itself, then there are different structures, right? So there are different levels of participation and freedom, say, that you can experience, let's say, between Central Java and Aceh, for instance, or let's say in Papua, right? So there are different reasons. The community that you grow up in and the larger sort of society in which you grow up in is also very important, right? So, things like ethnicity, religion, culture, all of these things matter. And yes, at the individual level, gender relations are very powerful, but also community relations. So when we talk about community participation in Indonesia, for example, right, there is community participation. Usually you'll see who participates at the community level. It is usually like Pa Erte, Pa Erwe, or maybe like in rare cases an Ibu Erwe or Erte, right? But usually it is people of, who are the community leaders of that sort, or maybe people who have more economic status or are more educated, so the poorest people in communities rarely get a chance to actually participate in the kind of participatory mechanisms that are in place in the housing and shelter sector in Indonesia, for example, right? So those are the things that need to be challenged. So does it happen? Yes. If you look at South Asia, for example, if you look at countries like India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, in general, actually, the status of women traditionally has been worse, and they're much more restrictive than, say, in Southeast Asia compared to, say, Indonesia or Malaysia. But what has happened in those countries is that because the NGOs are very powerful and they're very smart, so they when they intervene, they only focus on women, right? So if they want to create savings accounts and bank accounts, it's in the name of the women. If they want to give titles, it's in the name of women. All participation has to be women. So this is very targeted participation to bring. Similarly, there are other programs which look at, let's say in India, the people of lower castes and Dalits, that's also an example. So what I mean is just allowing people to decide for themselves, in my opinion, is not sufficient. So the state has a role in order to target participation in the right way so that the right kinds of individuals and groups within the community and larger society can be empowered. Otherwise, you will continue to sort of recreate the same kind of imbalances and, lack of access that have been there, so it's basically just window dressing in a way. So the state has a role to play, but the state will never realize this. The state has to be informed by civil society. That's where the pressure from, like, say, good NGOs and also the role of the state is to actually, in my opinion, to encourage a very vibrant local civil society, which knows the local issues, the local problems, knows the local communities. And that's the basic difference that you see in countries and cities where you see a lot of interesting innovations and progress being made. So hope that answers your question. So thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ashok Das. Is there any question? Raise the hand, please.
Pak, yes, I want to remind you that there is a question from Ibu Prabu Hardini in the chat. Maybe I can read the question, Pak. Yes, thank you for this is a question from Ibu Prabu Hardini. Thank you for a great presentation. I'd like to know from Bu Nany, by doing the community process, how the researchers dealt with the difficulty in making people speak up, as housing is as housing is a complex problem, and also how the consensus building can be developed regarding the action plan. Thank you, Prof. and Pak Asnawi.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, this is the answer for me from
Probo Hardini.
Prof. Hardini. Okay, this is my student, that alumni from the department, our department, ya. Halo, Mbak Prof. Hardini, how are you? Okay, Mbak Prof. Said that it is difficult for the researcher to speak up for the community. Yes, in some place that I get the community in the of course in the slum upgrading, yeah, usually it's difficult, but for me it is take a time, not only 1, 2, or 3 meeting, yeah, like I mentioned before in the Kemijen village Semarang, for the first time only little people that come to the meeting, yeah, and then again I asked to the Pak RW, Pak RT, why your community not come to the meeting? So usually he answered, oh, they have a job now. Oh, yeah, the reason is like that. But after many times, and I think the difficult to make people speak up. Usually I divide it to a little group of community, not with, of course, for one RT, I have the experience about 40 household, yeah, and I divided to little group, and then slowly I join for each group, yeah, to make their people speak. And usually I give the map. I give the map of the area, and I ask him to say, yeah, what is the problem of your area, again and again. But it's yeah, I think there are some strategy to make the people speak up, yeah. And the second about the consensus of building, yeah, in action plan. Usually I look from my experience. Usually I give them the map of the slum housing area, and then I give him to take what is the site plan, yeah, where is the housing, where is the masjid, where is the open space, where is the PAUD, where is the healthy facility, and then I ask to him, to them, what is the problem. But again and again, it is very slow, but it depends on the time of the project. Usually, some of project have the period of time. But of course, Pak Asnawi, for me, we are getting the research from the Diponegoro University. So at the range of time, we can go to the community again and again, maybe take a time, yeah, to make the rembuk warga, yeah, rembuk warga. So usually we sit in the floor, yeah, with the people, yeah, and then I think this is the strategy how to make the consensus building in the area. Oh yeah, again, I forget, Pak Asok, you said that in your presentation about Sombo, ya, Rusun Sombo, dan I remember at that time Sombo and Dupak. This is the two. Rusunawa is the first milestone in Surabaya, but it has been long time. I didn't see. Is it make Rusunawa with the slum or still sustain until now? This is maybe next. In the next time, I will look at the Dupa and Sombo because it's built at the 1990. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your information, Pak Asok, in Surabaya. But I hope you can make your research in Semarang, because Semarang have many information about the housing slum, and with the characteristic of Semarang, you can join with us to make.
That's my post-pandemic plan.
Yes, yes. But now your domicile in US or in Indonesia, Surabaya, or where?
No, I'm in Hawaii right now. Yeah.
Oh, Hawaii, Mānoa, yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, maybe this.
I just wanted to add something, if I can, Asnawi, to what Bunani said. This is for, the benefit of Probo also. So, like Bunani explained, to make communities participate meaningfully is very challenging. Yes. Okay. It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of patience and a lot of effort, right? So I'll give you one example. So the country of Bangladesh, for example, right, has very weak governmental infrastructure. Is was one of the world's poorest countries until recently. Now it's doing well, but for the longest time, its government capacity is like very corrupt, and so there was really, the government was very, very incapable. However, in terms of basic human development and all, it underwent tremendous change, and its human development indicators are better than India's now because of how the non-profit sector brought about that change. You've heard of the Grameen Bank, for example, which started, but there are so many NGO. This is one country where the NGO sector basically fixed, the failures of the state and the market, in a big way, right? But of course, they also have limitations. This is an example. Now, if you look at how they worked, it takes a very long time to do that, right? You can't just go in and engage with somebody for like 2 months or 3 months and think that you will generate great. So it takes years and years. So in that process, that's what I'm saying. So if somebody is going from the university to engage with a community and get them involved, that involvement can never be, as much as what a dedicated NGO can do, right? Because that NGO's major objective is to do that kind of sectoral intervention with those poor communities, right? Now if Bunani has got 10 other things to 100 other things to do. She has to teach, she has to do research, and she has to mentor students, and she has to do administrative work at the university, and then she's also doing community participation. So Bunani is not the answer to community participation, sort of growing in Semarang, right? Similarly, the government officials cannot also do that. Government officials and public agencies in general are under-resourced and overworked everywhere in the world, right? So they are not interested. It's not their main interest to go and do this. Yes, there may be some officials who are really sincere and very sensitive to the needs of the poor and very committed, but mostly there's no incentive for them to do that. So when community participation happens, so it is very strange. In the Surabaya case, the reason why Surabaya is an exception is because of the very concerted sort of and long-term commitment of, like ITS and Underpasilas with the communities of that. It is not easy to replicate in other places. It's very difficult, right? So that is where the civil society actors must play a role. So we need to create the conditions so that more civil society organizations can emerge. And of course, there should be a regulatory structure to make sure that they do the right things and that they are not, just cutting corners or like trying to take advantage of the situation. So that's the role of the state, to regulate the sector. But the promotion has to be there, because they are the only ones who can really engage. Otherwise, there's always going to be a lack of trust between the community and the state and the government officials who are well intentioned and trying to help poor communities. But there's always going to be suspicion and a lack of trust because of the history that has to be overcome in a way.
Thank you very much for the additional perspective, for us about what we're talking about today: empowerment, community empowerment, and community development, in housing sectors. I think from our discussion, we should see that the housing sector is a multifaceted problems. So sometimes it's okay in Bangladesh, but it's not okay in Indonesia, and also okay in Thailand, but not okay in Indonesia. So very contextual, So we need innovation. We need innovation based on the context where we propose the concept. So, but all of the information about the condition, that's the issue on the affordability to pay and the government commitment. This is a very contextual, and so this is a challenging issue. Okay, I think the time is over, and I'm very happy today. We are all can have a lecture from abroad, from the Ashok Das and from Professor Nany. And before I end this lecture, we can applause for lecture today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and then the floor, I think I give to Bu Wiwandari, maybe to give some closing statement or to close the lecture today. Bu Wiwandari.
No, thank you, Pak Asnawi. Actually, it's not really necessary. I just want to say thank you. It was really a nice lectures. I'm not very much into the housing issues, but I really get the interesting insight from Pak Asok and also from Prof. Nany, and thank you very much. Hope we can do the same thing again in the following semester with other students, maybe with different topic. Thank you, Pak. And maybe before we really end the session, we can take a picture together, maybe. I'm sorry to be, sounds like too Indonesian, Pak Asok.
No, that's good. I love Indonesia. It's my favorite country in the world, right?
Oh, thank you.
Look forward to have you here in Semarang, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. I want to come and spend some time.
Yeah.
Gimana Pak Imam? Jadi ambil foto?
Okay. Okay. There's 5 skin. Okay, the first skin is on cam. There's some people that's not cam. Okay, smile.
Cheese.
Okay, skin 2. Skin 3. Okay, skin 4.
How many?
Oh, okay, finish. Thank
Yes.
you.
Okay, thank you very
Okay,
much.
thank you,
Thank you,
Bapak
Pak Asnawi,
Ibu,
and all the
Pak
participants.
Asok,
so
Prof.
much.
Yes,
Nany,
yes.
and all.
You are welcome.
Very
You are
nice.
welcome.
And
See
very-
you next.